Hello everyone, and welcome back to the RimWorld Space Pirates series, where my beautiful compadres, we are still currently recovering from the epic battle with the UNSC at the end of last episode. As I'm sure you remember, they did quite the number on our little town, so we're having to try to rebuild part of our research building as well as our residential area. One of the first things we're doing today, though, other than that, is doing a little bit of trading with a combat supplier that had came by. We were running a little tight on cash, so we didn't buy anything, but we had managed to sell just enough stuff to make 254 silver. After that was completed, we started focusing on our defenses pretty heavily again by building another portion of our wall, during which time poor Sam went berserk and somehow got burnt, and then started attacking a cassowary for whatever reason, which, truth be told, we really didn't mind because it managed to take Sam down, we killed it really easy, and then we would take Sam all the way back home to safety. And now we can finally start working on our wall once again without any interruptions. I'm going to try to put a very heavy focus on defenses this episode. In the meantime, while we're working on that, we do have someone who fell from a transport pod named Henry, who was actually part of the UNSC and had a decent skill set. I assume that he is most likely a civilian contractor, as he doesn't actually have a uniform on. We would end up capturing him and beginning the recruitment process. As you know, we're in dire need of crewmates, so unless they're just completely dog shit, we don't really mind, and we'll try to recruit them. Speaking of our growing crew, we also have a problem with power as our base continues to grow, so we're actually going to try to put in some wood-fired generators to maybe help us out. At first I only tried one, that didn't really work out, so I built another. Eventually we'll end up having to build several more, and maybe some other types of power generation like windmills or solar panels. We would then end up building a fueled smithy because of course we're low on power, and really once we get a machining table it's going to be pretty useless for us. Now the reason I want this is because of all these Forerunner Sentinels that we are smashing up, and we're getting this Forerunner metal, we can actually use the smithy to build something like this beautiful helmet, as you can see. Not only does it look good though, it is extremely durable with 10,000 hit points and is worth a lot of money. So we're going to sell this one of course, but this does leave open the possibility in the future to maybe make some gear for our colonist. While still on the topic of our colonist, our pirates can be a little rough around the edges, if you know what I mean, so I decided to build them a rec room, that way they don't get into any mischief or start fights with one another. Our construction of this building though would be rudely interrupted by a mech cluster with a toxic spewer. At first the captain and the crew thought, well, maybe we'll just deal with it and not worry about it for a while, but then the air started turning a very bright green, and it looks like we're gonna have to send somebody out to deal with this. With this being such a pressing and immediate issue, the captain himself would actually go out to deal with it. Now of course though, he would end up taking Sam along with him. It would seem that the mechanoids themselves are actually asleep, and as long as we don't get too close, we shouldn't have any issues. We would find the structure that was housing this toxic spewer, and immediately we just stepped back out and started firing at the machine. Took a little while, but eventually it did explode, and we were basically all done. The mechanoids never woke up, and turns out this wasn't really a big issue for us. We would have the chance to sneak up on them while they're hibernating or turned off or whatever this is to try and kill them and take them back to deconstruct them for their precious metals, but it wasn't in our best interest, so we decided to go home. Sometime after returning home, we had yet another combat supplier who we would end up purchasing a few things off of. You might be shocked to see how many of these Outlander factions don't mind doing business with pirates, especially when they're selling us stolen UNSC tech like a rocket launcher and a Spartan helmet. Although, I suppose that does kinda make sense, they're essentially pirates themselves. We would end up giving the Recon Power Armor helmet to the captain himself, although I am also keeping his hat in his inventory, that way we can put it on anytime we feel like. The cowboy hat of course being for pleasure, and the Recon helmet being for business, the business of protecting his face from any bullets. I then caught our two monkeys making sweet succulent love right in the middle of town, and turns out monkey number 2 here is actually pregnant, which is pretty cool, and that also means that we're going to have 3 monkeys that need names. We then started working on a new field to grow crops. This time around though, we're not actually going to be growing any food. No, we're going to be planting and growing some dye plants. This will not only give us the ability to paint our ship, but also the ability to dye the apparel of our pirates, truly making them our own, right? And also getting rid of that disgusting green UNSC paint job from the ship. Also something you guys noticed and pointed out last episode is that Zap Zap here is actually actually a female. I have no idea how I didn't catch that, but I'm going to chalk it up to the fact that, we're not really all that familiar with Ungoi biology and anatomy. I mean, for God's sake, I haven't seen her lay any eggs or anything, cut me some slack. Well, regardless of her anatomy though, Zap Zap would finish research into machining, giving us the ability to build a machining table, which is going to make chopping up those sentinels from the Forerunners so much easier and making that metal much more obtainable. As some of the pirates were working on our Forerunner metal operations, the others were working on the last remaining portion of our wall, which was also the most difficult because it goes right through this little swampy bit of land. However, things would get a little bit easier after we recruited Henry here. Once he was done equipping a toque and some weapons and whatever else he could find in the storage room, he would come out and help us finish up the last remaining bits and pieces of this wall, finally completing the entire thing. Now, the best part about this wall is it should keep us safe from some pretty basic threats, but unfortunately that's about all it's really going to be good for, is just normal raids and stuff like that, until we actually get some turrets and traps set up to try and prevent any larger threats, such as a massive UNSC raid that actually comes in on foot. And that is assuming that those raids come in on foot and they don't just drop right in on top of us. I know, the more I talk about the wall, the less useful it seems. It would provide us with some sense of security though, enough that we could actually take a little leisure hour here and there, enjoy some poker and some horseshoes, and just kind of take a little time to ourselves. Tiny here was so grateful to the captain for his new machining table in the workshop, he even decided to make him a Forerunner Metal Gladius as something of a thank you, if you will. As mentioned before, this weapon would be extremely durable, but also very sharp, giving it quite the amount of damage. The captain was so excited about his new weapon, he decided to celebrate by taking everyone out on a conquest. It was a pirate band of pigs or something like that. I would tell you their name, but we didn't really care. We didn't even come here for the food. We just came here to cause a little bit of havoc and maybe sell their guns. So, shall we begin? Also the perfect opportunity for the captain to try out his rocket launcher that we bought from the Outlanders. I gotta say, it really came in clutch here because we were really outnumbered by the pig pirates. We just had some massive firepower on our side. Our superior weapons truly gave us the upper hand, killing many of the pirates until what few remained actually decided to try and flee the area. However, we did have two of them with some okay looking stats, so we decided to try and tend to them so they don't bleed out on the ground, and that way we can take them back home with us. Before we go back home though, we're going to be making a little pit stop at a nearby Outlander town to sell some of the things that we had collected. However, back home, there was a little bit of an issue. We had a pretty large group of Flood that were going to try and raid our base. Unfortunately, nobody was home except for our monkeys, so I would try to put them in their own little area in the ship to keep them safe. All three of the monkeys began rushing into the ship to safety, but unfortunately, Monkey 1 was caught. Suffering from several different plasma burns, our poor little monkey was dead. There was hardly any time to focus on that though, because the onslaught of Flood was incredible, and not in a good way, I'm afraid. Though that being said, the Forerunner Sentinel factory seemed to be working in overtime, and they actually managed to get the outbreak under control. But there was one little problem. When the Sentinels die, they tend to catch things on fire. Luckily, being in the jungle, we're always getting a lot of rain, so thankfully this wouldn't become a much larger issue for us. Now that we know for sure our home won't be destroyed while we're out and about, we could finally trade with the Outlanders. We would mostly just sell to them some of the shitty weapons that the pig pirates had before we finally returned back home, where I'm afraid we would have to bury our poor monkey, the first casualty of our pirate crew. I felt awful that he had died, but I felt even more awful that we had yet to name him before it happened. To ensure that the other monkeys don't suffer the same sad fate, I would end up naming them. We would name them Jangles and Abu. First up, the name Jangles is provided by our good friend Mango4586, who was saying that this is in reference to Jangles the Moon Monkey from the Fallout franchise. And then the name Abu was actually provided by our good friend Scrim, I believe? SC-Rim? Anyhow, Abu of course is in reference to the monkey from Aladdin, so thank you both for those wonderful names, and thank you to everyone who left a suggestion. Now that that's taken care of, it feels like a good time to go over the stats of our pig people that we've captured. So first up here we have Burk, I guess, and they are good good at plants and animals and okay at melee. We then have Lumpy, who is a good shot and a good melee fighter for the most part, and will also be helping Zap Zap with plenty of research. Well, once we finally get her recruited, that is, along with Bururk, which we're gonna have to change that damn name at some point because that's just strange as shit if you ask me. Although their recruitment will take a very long time, as mentioned, it is also a good time to maybe show off something we purchased from the Outlanders. This, my friends, is a holodeck, kind of like a VR, except it's all around you and you don't strap anything onto your head. Now this, I believe, is primarily used for recreation, but our pirate crew will also be using it for specific scenarios like battles and things of that sort. I also noticed that our people had been chopping up the flood corpses, which gave us rotten meat and flood spores. I disabled the flood corpse butchering in the butcher table because obviously I would assume I don't have to tell you how dangerous this is. Our people could end up eating some of this and them themselves becoming the flood. It could be a big issue. Well, other than the flood, we also had another little problem. We had another Imperial tribute collector, and they all had some pretty good weapons that were not bio-coded, and I really wanted them. Just add them to the already extremely long list of enemies that we're currently taking things from. It did feel like a bit of a waste though, because most of the soldiers, if not all of the soldiers, have death acidifiers, which means that as soon as we hit them with the massive cannon that is on our ship, they died and we lost all the equipment for the most part. The captain did manage to down this soldier though. We were going to recruit him, but he was a wimp and there are no room for cowards in our pirate crew. So instead we opted for stripping him so that his apparel doesn't become tainted once we put a few bullets in his head. Or stab him to death because bullets are too good for these sickos coming and begging for tribute, claiming to be a once great empire, but they come begging like orphaned puppies. Disgusting. We take what we want. And now with that, we have plenty of equipment to give to any of our new recruits once they join us, if we decide not to sell that equipment, of course, that is. Something we do need though is some more residential housing, which is what we're completing now. It was also during this time that Zap Zap had finished her extensive research into gun turrets, allowing us to now build some pretty simple ones. As we were preparing to build some of those, I realized that having 4 total entrances for enemies to come through is not a great idea, and I would rather limit that to 1 entrance per side of the wall, so that's exactly what we began doing first. Late into the night though, we had a group of children who approached us begging for 185 silver to buy back one of their friends who were recently kidnapped. And to possibly everyone's surprise, Captain Udo would happily oblige by providing the silver to the children. We may be honorless thieves and pirates who go on murderous rampages, but we're not monsters. You know, or maybe it has something to do with the fact that the captain himself was a child spy. His young life of espionage was filled with horrible events no child should ever have to endure. The same goes for our first mate Zap Zap here, who as a child also was an industrial orphan, who also endured horrible things as a child in the mines and workhouses of her industrial homeworld. But it was finally time for us to begin building some gun turrets, 2 at each entrance, so 4 in total. These are mini turrets that are already built inside their own bunkers, giving them some ample protection. Eventually though, we finally recruited Bururk into our ranks, and they would immediately go out and start chopping down some rice, just basically getting to work, which was very nice that they were contributing, of course. They also decided to help contribute by helping us repaint the entire ship. Instead of the aforementioned disgusting UNSC green that just shows some type of authoritarianism or even fascism, dare I say it, we're going to be going with a nice black and red, which is much friendlier, perhaps? Late one evening, yet another Outlander combat supplier would stop in, and they wanted to purchase our flood spores, and they were willing to pay us a pretty penny for them. What they wanted them for, I have no idea. I hope some type of science experiments, but either way, we sold them. In that case, I think we'll continue butchering the flood. We got a little bit of money from it. We also got a sniper rifle and yet another UNSC Spartan helmet. I would equip the 2 items on Sam and Captain Udo, as Sam is our best shot and the captain, well, he's just pretty damn good at everything, isn't he? I would even dye the 2 helmets of both of them, giving them a more blended look into the armor that they currently wear. With Sam's shooting skill, her new gun link that she's been wearing, and this sniper rifle, she will make for one deadly opponent. Sometime later, and we had finally recruited Lumpy into our ranks, which was very exciting. We wasted no time in expanding our little research shack here, that way Lumpy could help out out Zap Zap with all of the research projects. But things would take a turn for the worst in the form of yet another raid from the UNSC. I've been wondering where they've been this episode. Turns out they're dropping in right on top of us, some very skilled and elite warriors, ODSTs. Their squad was scattered all around town, but they immediately took cover behind our residential buildings and started having a shootout with our pirates. Tiny had caught a stray bullet, and then so did Lumpy, and she died. These ODSTs were none like we had experienced before. They were oozing with experience. The captain realized they were dug in deep in the town, and hiding behind our barricades wouldn't save us. We would have to run throughout our buildings and try to have some type of guerrilla warfare with them. Eventually, they did begin to flee. Two of them remained and were trying to escape. Sam would try to track them down with her sniper and shoot them from afar. One of them was killed, and the other burst down through our door and got away. The armor of these ODSTs must be incredibly durable, as 3 of them, the only other 3 there were still alive after all that. We would end up capturing 2 of them and then finishing off the last, as we weren't too impressed with his traits and skills. Once the dust had settled though, the realization had really set in on us that Lumpy had died. Not only Lumpy, but also our poor baby monkey, Abu, as well. The second and third casualties of our pirate crew. We would end up giving them both a proper pirate's burial, even though Lumpy hadn't been with us for very long at all, maybe a day or 2 before the ODSTs dropped and she died. She still needed a proper burial because she had joined us nonetheless. In the meantime, we're going to be setting up a radio terminal as well as a large antenna so that we can communicate with any trade ships that get into orbit around this planet. Or we may also be able to contact the Orbital Traders Hub, which is exactly what we decided to do. Probably the best part about being a pirate clan, even a small one, means that we have certain connections, such as to the Kigyar pirates. These jackal pirates are vicious monsters, even more so than us by leaps and bounds. I can't wait to see what they have for sale. We built some orbital trade beacons in our storage rooms to link up with our radio terminals, and then finally the Kigyar ship was in orbit, so we decided to do a little bit of trading with them. They actually had some slaves that would join us as colonists, so we ended up purchasing 2 people, both of which were immediately instructed by Captain Udo himself to go into the storage room and equip any weapons and armor that their little hearts desire. I'm not going to lie, the equipment we had for them wasn't exactly up to par, but it'll do for now. Welcome aboard. First up, we have the jealous and kind ex-spaceship chef named Ryan, who is obviously very good at cooking and is pretty good at medical and social as well. Based on what I can tell, it looks like the starship that he was aboard and employed on was attacked by Kigyar pirates, and that's how he became their slave. Next up, we have Manticary here, who actually happens to be an ascetic cannibal pyromaniac who just so happened to be a jailbird as an adult with a very good melee skill, and that's about it, but that was what interested us about her. I doubt she'll do too well with those hand cannons that she's holding, but that is why she has 2 of them. A few days later, we built Zap Zap a brand new high-tech research table. This should make researching new technologies much faster. As you can see, we still have quite a few to go before we get to Starflight Basics, which is what we need before we can start building hull for the ship. Don't forget, we are technically space pirates, so we do need to get back into outer space with a much better ship. A few days later though, and we would finally recruit one of the ODSTs known as Bad Luck after several weeks of trying to break their spirit and convince them to be a pirate. I started working on a secondary high-tech research bench, as I am really trying to speed run these technologies into Starflight Basics. That way we can get back into space, as I was yapping about earlier, of course. Then I began to think, you know, we are pirates. It would only make sense if our base had the aesthetic of a pirate base. So I removed the skulls from some of our previous enemies, and we would actually start sticking them on spikes and putting them out by our walls. I realize this might seem trivial and meaningless, but hey, first impressions are everything. We then would have a request from the Covenant of all people, and they were actually asking if they could drop some toxic waste on us, and in exchange they would give us a few different things, so we actually accepted for a Cataphract helmet as well as an Archotech spine. Now we accepted this for a few different reasons. reasons. One, because we wanted these items, but two, because we wanted to improve relations with the Covenant so that we could actually begin trading with them. Some Covenant weapons would really be amazing for us, to be honest. And you know what? Funny enough, several days later, a very large caravan with a lot of grunts ended up arriving, and they were looking to do some trading with us. As one might expect, they were extremely interested in our Forerunner metal, something about their gods or something, I don't know, but we did end up buying a plasma rifle off of them as well as a plasma pistol. These two weapons alone were very, very expensive, but they are well worth it, as we've seen several times simply with Zap Zap's plasma pistol alone. While the Covenant forces were here though, we had a formidable foe in the form of the Empire. It would seem they're quite pissed off about us attacking their tribute collector earlier on in the episode. Can't say I blame them. They took out our turrets pretty quickly and hit a few of our spike traps, but they wouldn't really encounter any defenses on our side. We were hiding inside our ship, hoping that the Covenant would take care of them for us. And I was not disappointed, I must say. The endless droves of grunts that the Covenant had brought along with them were basically one gigantic plasma shotgun killing Imperial soldiers left and right. They would decide to flee, which was a really good move on their part, and I also think hiding inside was a good move on our part. Not only would we have probably gotten injured by the Covenant forces, but also we may have damaged them and caused them to be pissed off at us. One of the greatest things about this though, there were plenty of soldiers left behind that we could strip of their gear and keep for ourselves. Most of them, though, were unwaveringly loyal to the Empire, so we couldn't take them as soldiers. As briefly touched on before, though, all of their gear was now ours, and there was a lot of gear. Of course, we had plenty of cataphract armor and helmets and recon armor and helmets from the Empire, but more importantly, we had a smorgasbord of plasma pistols from all of the Ungoi that had died under the Covenant. Which, as you could imagine, as someone who just bought those weapons off the Covenant, paying full price, I felt a little bit silly, but I do think we got our silver back, as you can see. Since the majority of the Imperial forces were unwaveringly loyal to their home faction, we had only managed to capture this one fella here with a really good melee stat, and he also had a burning passion in intellectual. He was also a very neurotic masochist who was super immune, which will come in handy because we're constantly getting infections and whatnot here in the jungle. I just don't always show those. Now back to our newly found large stockpile of arms, which is composed of mostly plasma pistols as discussed earlier. I am going to try to sell these, and I know I won't get the full sale price, but it's better than keeping them all there as we really don't need that many of them, and for the most part, most of them are awful or poor quality, so they're not that wonderful. We're going to attempt to try and offload them to some pirate combat suppliers. They're always eager to get their hands on some Covenant tech. It'll probably take a few volleys of trade ships though, so we'll do that in the background. Days later, the ODST, known as Gaines, would finally join us, and of course she immediately went into the storage room to begin equipping some decent weapons and armor so that she can efficiently protect our pirate crew. We would also begin working on some new forms of power generation just to add a little bit of variety, so we ended up building 2 brand new wind turbines, and we also started clearing out the vegetation around them to ensure that we get plenty of power from them. Now, the reason that we're doing this and building these batteries and trying to store as much power as possible is because we are exponentially expanding our research building. Like I said earlier, I am trying to speed run the Starflight basics as well as any other ship technologies that need to be researched, and to do so we're going to need plenty of high-tech research benches as well as people to begin researching at those benches, so yeah, that's what we're doing here right now. And it's going pretty well, and very fast, I must say. At one point we had yet another combat supplier, and of course we were selling them all of our new arms and everything that we have in storage, but we actually bought some interesting items off of them. We would end up purchasing an advanced shield. Of course we made plenty of silver off the trade, but we also bought a ship blueprint. I decided to buy it in case it would come in handy. I wanted to put it down to see how it works, and I would end up doing so, of course, course it's not really going to be a viable option to actually build this blueprint until we research the technologies that are required to even start on the hull and stuff like that. But I tried it, nothing really happened, so I decided to uninstall it and take it all the way back home. But who knows, maybe it'll come in handy in the future. Speaking of the future, if we don't manage to get off this rock sometime soon and get back to our pirating ways above and in the stars, looks like we're going to be dealing with some pretty big insect hives. I expected that this could be an issue with taking on those waste packs, but it's worth it for some decent relations with the Covenant. Later on, we would finally recruit the Imperial soldier that we have captured from the large raid where they fought with the Covenant, send him into the storage room, yada yada, you know the drill. He equipped weapons and armor, and we're happy to have him. His main duties will be as a researcher along with Ryan, Sam, and Zap Zap. I know I keep harping on research, but it's very important to me because as a space pirate series, what we're trying to create here, I feel like there's a lot of pirates on the ground in this series thus far, so I really just want to focus this episode so much on research. That way next episode, we should be able to launch off the planet with the appropriately sized ship that we're wanting and the huge crew that we currently have, as you can see. As it stands, we have a pretty good sized crew of 11 people. I think I might be willing to grow it just a little bit more so we have some more people who are actually able to fight, as someone like Tiny there is only able to construct. So it'd be nice to have some other people who can actually shoot and try to fight any invaders that are boarding our ship, but having too many mouths to feed would be a big problem. But my friends, as the episode winds down to an end here, I do want to talk about some lore, as you guys have already been providing some amazing lore for our characters and the story. First up, we have some backstory for Zap Zap from our friend Wood Goldfish 9124, who says that Zap Zap's parents actually worked on an industrial mining ship at one point. Something went haywire and the ship actually crashed on Captain Udo's planet. This would explain why she and Udo know each other, as well as how she knows how to pilot a ship. Next up, we have some backstory for the captain and Zap Zap from our good friend Yuya Plays 9311, who says, the two of them had been captured by the UNSC and just so happened to be sharing a prison cell. Udo had told Zap Zap that he overheard one of the guards talking about a science ship that had been docked at the base. They had heard many details about the ship, especially the small crew with only 2 members and 1 mech, thinking of course they'd be able to take them out quite easily. They had been planning their escape from the prison for quite a while and thought this was the perfect opportunity. Managing to break out of their prison cell, getting their personal belongings back like their weapons, and stowing away in the research vessel. And that is the perfect explanation and story of the events leading up to, well, right before we started the series when the 2 of them were on board the ship. Now, before we go today as well, we are going to be renaming our ship that I had previously called Old Bessie into the Star Reaper, a much more foreboding and cool name. And this badass ship name was of course provided by one of you guys, our good friend Moro Zapasum, I believe is how you pronounce it, so thank you ever so much for that. But my friends, I do truly hope that you have enjoyed today's episode. I'm sorry that it's a little bit less than 30 minutes. I tend to try to shoot for that, if not around 35 or yada yada. You guys know how it is. There's just so much research that I tried to cram into this episode, and I was becoming a little bit bored with it is all, and you know, occasionally dealing with threats and stuff like that. Not that this episode wasn't fun, don't get me wrong. I really enjoyed it, and I'm really enjoying this series, and I'm glad you guys are too. But I love you guys ever so much, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.